those, got it. So those logical structures, the way in which they're instantiated is always going to differ according to time and place in which they can find footholds in human action. And so that's why, so we're going to have diversity, yes, but it's going to be diversity of the one, the reflective concept. Okay, anyway, yeah, sorry. If we did want to get to Hegel.
Sorry, Peter. Thank you.
I just wanted to think that one out a little bit because it's something that is infinitely fascinating to me.
But that does foreshadow what we're reading today in respect to the individual, you know, the individual personality, the psychology of an individual as what you're calling a reflex of the universal spirit. Mm. So there is a tie-in to today's reading.
Oh, interesting. I've actually not prepared for this for change. I'm trying not to prepare at all for Hegel to see how I roll with it, just because Aristotle has just completely preoccupied me. It's hard for me to do anything else at a high level. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes. So we were going to just read a chunk. I mean, maybe 8 paragraphs or not 10 paragraphs is maybe too big of a chunk. But we can read like 4 paragraphs at a time. Like maybe 298 to 300.
Are there 5 of us today? How many are here? Oh, there's 7.
6. The 6 because there's 2 Bo's.
6.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Bo's host and iPad.
I was going to say if we did 5 for each section, then we'd do half and half.
Well, let's just read and see how fast we get through what we read, and hopefully we can read a second chunk today.
Okay.
Just in the interest of getting started, I'll start reading. Okay, the title of the new section is Observation of Self-Consciousness in its Purity and in Relation to External Actuality, Logical and Psychological Laws. Observation of nature finds the concept realized in inorganic nature as laws, whose moments are things which at the same time behave as abstractions. However, this concept is not a simplicity reflected into itself. On the other hand, the life of organic nature is only this simplicity reflected into itself. The opposition of itself as the opposition of universal and singular, which does not break apart within the essence of this life itself. The essence is not the genus, which in its undifferentiated elements separates itself and moves itself, and which at the same time would be for itself undifferentiated within its opposition. This free concept, whose universality has that developed singularity just as absolutely within itself, this free concept is found by observation only in the concept existing as the concept itself, or in self-consciousness. While observation now turns back around into itself, and it directs itself to the actual concept as the free concept, it finds, first of all, the laws of thought. This singular individuality, which thinking is in its own self, is the abstract movement of the negative, taken entirely back into simplicity, and the laws lie outside the bounds of reality. Formal logic. To say they have no reality generally means nothing but that they are without truth. To be sure, they are supposed not to be the entire truth, but nonetheless to be formally true. Yet the purely formal without reality is itself a thought thing. That is, an empty abstraction, without any estrangement in it, an estrangement which, if it were there, would be nothing else but the content itself. But on the other side of the coin, while they are the laws of pure thinking, and pure thinking is in itself the universal, and is thus knowing that immediately, and is thus knowing that immediately has being, and thereby has all reality in it. These laws are absolute concepts, and they are inseparably the essentialities both of form and of things. Since universality, which moves itself within itself, is the estranged simple concept, the concept has in this way a content in itself, the kind of content which is all content, but is not a sensuous being. It is a content that is neither in contradiction to nor separated in any way from the form. Rather, it is essentially the form itself, for the latter is nothing but the universal dividing itself into its pure moments. If I go one more, or do you want to? Okay. However, just as this form or this content is for observation, as observation, it also acquires the determination of a found content, i.e., only existing content. It becomes a motionless being of relations, a set of detached necessities, which, as a rigidly fixed content in and for themselves, are supposed to have truth in their determinateness, and in that way are in fact extracted from the form. However, this absolute truth of fixed determinatenesses or of many various laws contradicts the unity of self-consciousness, or it contradicts the unity of thinking and form as such. What is declared to be a fixed and constant law in itself can only be a moment of the unity reflecting itself into itself. It can come on the scene only as a vanishing magnitude. However, in the course of being studied, they are torn away from the context of movement and are arranged as singulars. Then these determinatenesses are not lacking in content, since they have in fact a determinate content. What they lack is form, which is their essence. In fact, it is not because they are supposed to be only formal and to have no content that these laws are not the truth of thinking. Rather, it is for the very opposite reason, namely, because it is in their determinateness, or just as a content from which the form has been taken, that they are supposed to count as something absolute. In their truth as vanishing moments in the unity of thinking, they would have to be taken to be knowing, or to be the thinking movement, but not taken to be laws of knowing. However, observation is not knowing itself, and it does not recognize that it is not knowing. Rather, observation inverts its nature into the shape of being, i.e., it grasps its negativity only as laws of being. Here it is sufficient to have pointed out the invalidity of the so-called laws of thinking on the basis of the universal nature of what is at issue. The more precise development of this belongs to speculative philosophy, in which those laws prove themselves to be what they are in truth, namely singular vanishing moments, whose truth is only the whole of the thinking movement, or knowing itself. All right. There's a lot there. All right.
So the first paragraph looks like it's dealing with the difference between observation of organic versus observation of inorganic nature.
Mhm.
Observation of inorganic nature is the laws it encounters.
Yeah, so I did wonder about that. Like, obviously, or not obviously, but I took him to contrasting the laws of nature or physical laws with the inorganic context, which he calls the laws of thought. So I wondered, is he talking about formal logic here, or is this really just laying the groundwork for the psychology that he starts to talk about in 302?
All right.
So we're not talking. So is he talking about formal logic, or is he talking about sort of the like universal or psychological theory?
It seems to me like he's making this distinction between laws and the things that they're laws of. And that distinction is a consequence of observation itself, right? because its method is to observe, and therefore to posit itself as other than what it's observing, and that otherness of its method is then projected into the object it's observing, and now we have the otherness of the concept, namely law, to what it's the concept of, namely the things that are lawful. And that's the abstraction he mentions, I think, in the first sentence. Go ahead, Peter.
I just also want to point out he's drawing the first distinction here, and he's going to draw the distinction between laws of psychology and the other laws of nature, and it's in the next paragraph, I guess it is. But it's the distinction I saw here was that, so the first thing, if you're observing the inorganic nature, you get these laws, but there are laws of these independent, what he calls them, independent abstract, what is it called?
Right.
Sometimes behave whose moments are things which at the same time behave as abstractions.
Right.
So we have these laws of these individual abstractions, and we try and externally plaster them together. Whereas when you observe organic life, you can't avoid the reflection into itself, and but it's at that really high abstract level, and you don't have anything particular enough to deal with it at the level he's stating it. I think that's part of the simplicity that maybe Hegel, or not Hegel or Philip, whatever that guy is name.
So thinking about analysis and synthesis here, we kind of see that kind of structure going on because we have a movement through a movement that produces the moments, but the moments as determinations are abstracted from the movement which produces them. And so when we have them separate, the law is taken as a sort of incomplete abstraction away from the movement which produced the determinations in the first place. So we have to understand them in their relation to each other to have a law for the production of determination, not just determinations themselves separated from movement.
And you're thinking movement in terms of synthesis?
Yes, movement in terms of synthesis. And so when he calls them moments, right, the moments are kind of like cuts in terms of analysis.
You're playing all the linguistic registers at the same time, Tyler. Got a little Proust and a little Dedekind and a little Kant and a little Aristotle.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of motion in this. I think it's almost like lack of motion. Doesn't he sort of say that?
But at the very beginning, right? But I
the
think
genus was. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The simplicity is the synthesis that is productive of its moments, right? And the law, or if this synthesis is considered as a law, as something governing things, but not themselves the things, then we have this separation. There's the moving things, and then there's the unmoving law that somehow governs them, right? That's at least how I was understanding this talk about movement that Tyler introduced.
I wanted to understand the sentence. The essence is not the genus, which is undifferentiated element separates itself and moves itself. Now, I'm just trying to say, is it the genus? So the essence we're talking about here is not the genus. But is this undifferentiated thing whose elements separate itself and move itself? I think that is the genus. That's a parenthetical phrase describing genus, not the essence, right? Just from a grammatical point.
298, right?
That's
Yeah.
interesting. One. Yeah, okay. I mean, I have to say, just generally, the way he's talking about genus still remains somewhat opaque to me. So I'm glad you're pointing this out, because I need to get a better handle on it. Das
Well, he
Wesen
does say
ist
that the-
Gattung? Yes, so grammatically. Okay, das Wesen is neuter, die Gattung is feminine, and then the subordinate clause is introduced by a feminine relative pronoun, welche. So he's talking about die Gattung. He's
So
talking about
yeah, it's the genus that is the thing that has its self-moving
Yes.
thing. But we're not talking about this because we're not quite there yet.
Mhm.
We're stuck talking about this essence, which is, I guess, a fixed thing in observing like the simple.
Right. Let's see.
Well, also the essence is, I think he's associated with the species previously, and I don't think Hegel would ever say that the species separates itself or moves itself. The genus would be the universal that does that with, but then when he gets to talking about the undifferent, it would be for itself undifferentiated within its opposition. The opposition within genus presumably is species. I don't quite get that,
But that's a good point. I like your point about the undifferentiated aspect. You can't have the moment until you have you can't have the movement until you have the differentiated moments. And right now we're in the simplicity of things wrapping back to itself, which I guess is the undifferentiated immediate union of these things as a first abstraction.
although I wouldn't call it an abstraction, right? The genus would not be an abstraction.
I think his point is that we're not talking about a genus here. We're not yet at the genus. I thought that's what the point was.
Oh, okay. The essence is not the genus. Okay, that could be. Because he does say this free concept.
Yes.
So that this free concept, whose universality has that developed singularity just as absolutely within itself, is found by observation only in the concept existing as the concept itself.
It's found. It's not developed. It's you just saw it rolled under the couch and you pulled it out. Hey, look at this thing I found.
Right, because it's observing, right? And all it can do is observe. And now it's starting to observe inward. And so the same split that was projected outward is now going to be projected inward. And so now we get, rather, instead of thought as alive, we get formal thought, right? As distinct from what it thinks, right? And that's going to be formal logic as this abstract entity whose structures can be investigated independent of looking at anything that is thought through it.
And the freedom comes from the fact that since it's reflected into itself, it's only depending on itself, as it were. So it's only limited by itself. So it's free, something like that.
Yeah, I'm tying all those kind of expressions to what he said about
Simple reflection. Of
yeah,
concept.
exactly.
Right.
Which is to say life, that you can't observe that something's alive.
You can with a microscope, right?
No, you can't observe that something's alive. Okay, so and so observation is going to right, and so now observation is going to turn to its own thinking, and it's not going to be able to observe itself as alive, precisely because it continues to observe, and you can't observe life.
So I would. It's also. I've been looking at Carl Rogers videotapes. So.
Oh Lord.
When you're in a relationship, you can't observe the relationship.
Yeah.
So therapists, like who are not particularly competent, try to abstract themselves from relationship by applying what they view as laws of the relationship, which have been distilled into two techniques.
Right. Oh, yes, horrible. They're not even explanatory laws, they're manipulative laws.
Yeah, they're manipulative laws, and they're really the attempt of the therapist to abstract themselves from the
Yeah.
relationship that they are indissolubly involved in.
Fucking techne, man. Just makes me want to puke sometimes. The substitution of techne for essence is the downfall.
Yes,
It's the downfall.
right.
Ah.
Well, that's what goes on in Peter's company with the managers. They substitute techne for essence.
Yeah. Voila.
They're not even that sophisticated though. They just have techne. They don't even know there's essence.
Yes, but they think they're talking about something.
Just like the French.
And so that they think they're talking about something, right? But they're not, because they don't have even the intimation of essence or something being independent of the workings of the techne. Anyway, yeah. So sorry, that's a learned, an erudite aside. But anyway.
So the observation. So for one thing, it can't observe life, but for another thing, it can't observe observing. And so you have this dilemma that the moments it produces, right, are necessarily going to stay abstracted from itself as an activity.
Yeah, nice. Yes. Right. And of course, once moments are abstracted, they're treated as independent things, as substances, right? And so that's how we think of like the universal is not the singular, right? Right. And so we literally substantialize the moments and giving them independent existence, right? So we've got this horse and this man and this universal, and we treat them basically the same way, right? As outside of the network of their inner movement. No, that's a nice point. Did you want to piggyback on what I just said or correct it?
Oh yeah, I was just going to mention like singular. It is funny because singular, they seem to be all over the place, and it means the same thing in all these different places, all these singulars. So the universality of the singular is kind of staring everyone in the face, but they.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, that's kind of like sense certainty structure, right? Sense certainty was supposed to be the most particular singular thing, and turned out to be the most generic.
Right. Oh yeah, no, that's a very nice point. I mean, that shows the abstract. That shows the abstraction of that we introduce into thinking about thought when we separate the moments into things, right? No, that's good, because that shows their inner belongingness to one another, and they're not separate. They're only distinct, to use Tyler's helpful distinction. Right. Okay. So I hope he talks more about genus, but I don't know if he will. So what do we understand this clause about genus to actually say? Right? Is the genus alive or isn't it? I don't quite get it.
There's movement. If you poke it with a stick, it moves, I guess.
The genus itself? Yeah, I think he's ultimately going to have to say something like that. But I don't think that observing reason understands it that way. So
it says the genus in its undifferentiated elements separates itself and moves itself. So if you think of it as undifferentiated, it was just like blows itself apart and starts moving around or something.
Well, I mean, when he says this free concept, I took him when I originally read it to be referring back to the genus, as though and then the way he just talks about the genus in that paragraph, it's as though the genus is the concept and it separates itself and moves itself in the moments of the species, or in the moments of kind of the essence.
Yeah, I took that. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
I'm just go ahead, because I'm still trying.
I was going to say I took this free concept, or what he says, the free concept. I took that to refer to what he said, to the life, the organic nature as a simplicity reflected into itself.
Yeah, me too.
And then he's saying, "Oh, by the way, that's not the genus."
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying then the essence is the free concept?
No. the life of organic nature is only this simplicity reflected into itself.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I thought was another way of talking about the genus, because he says the essence is not the genus. The essence has to do with, well, this is what I don't get, but I remember Michael talking a while back in one of the Aristotle sessions where the essence is not the universal. It is the sort of the particular, what the particular is. And so he's differentiating the particular from the universal, i.e. the essence from the genus. The genus is that which in its undifferentiation separates itself and moves itself. So that is, to me, that's kind of a descriptive of the concept, which, as you say, is the simplicity reflected into itself.
He seems to make a distinction between that senses which does not break apart within the essence of this life itself. So and then that's the first introduction of the word essence in this paragraph, right?
Mhm.
So he must be referring back to that essence. And so I guess he's drawing a distinction between the concept of life and its essence. Or
Yeah, something like that. I mean, because ultimately this whole paragraph is tending towards, observing reason only finds what it is looking for in itself, in its own self-consciousness. And then it's that in that self-consciousness, it is simplicity reflected into itself. It is the opposition of universal and singular that doesn't break apart the essence of this life, right? So what it's seeking, it is itself that which it seeks, but it's going to now seek what it seeks in itself through observation, and therefore necessarily misses it. So what is the free concept? Self-consciousness, right? What is simplicity reflected into itself as life? Self-consciousness.
Right. And the one, I guess, the point at which we're sort of parsing the language in a bit of contention is what is genus referring to? That's really the only question. But other than that, I think we're all seeing the paragraph similarly.
Cool. Yeah, no, like I say, I stumbled over how we talked about genus, so I don't have anything clear to say about that.
we move to
So
299.
self-consciousness is self-grasping self.
Huh?
Self-consciousness is self-grasping self.
Well, I mean, yes, but that's a double entendre, right?
Yes, that's what I'm pointing at. Yeah.
Right, and
There's a
that's the
double
double
entendre
entendre.
in self-consciousness, right? Okay.
That's the double entendre he actually worked out the implications of in the chapter on self-consciousness, where the master and the slave each facing each other, that relationship is self-consciousness because it's self-conscious of self, right? And so that self-consciousness isn't necessarily isn't restricted to like within my body, right? Every social interaction is self-consciousness. And so, as Hood likes to say, there's a sense in which every conscious being is part of my own self-awareness.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that's the double-sided nature of self-consciousness. Everybody's included in my self-consciousness, just like I'm included in everybody else's self-consciousness. And so there's no firm distinction between inner self-consciousness and outer self-consciousness as two kinds of self-consciousness, right? Just self-consciousness. And
but observing consciousness misses the simplicity. It doesn't understand what you just said that Rodel said.
Right. Oh yeah. Yes, exactly. Because you can't observe reflection into self. Or you can't observe this simplicity. You can't observe simplicity. You have to understand it, right? You have to understand, like the ergon, in which all the different parts are parts of one behavior, one action, or one thing, and that the unity of something is never observable. It's only intelligible. Right? I mean, is that helpful, or is that just a repetition of the same that's not addressing what you're thinking about?
No, it's helpful to me. Thank you, Michael.
Awesome. All right, so we've agreed to not worry too much about genus at this point. And so now we go to the next paragraph. Okay, so observation turns back around into itself and it directs itself to the actual concept as the free concept. And it finds, first of all, the laws of thought. Okay, so there's the first misstep. All right. We all understand the problem of law, right? Okay.
And so laws of thought here, I still need to get clear. Are these the formal laws of formal logic?
Yeah, it's like the Port
Okay.
Royale logic.
Something like that,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
They have no reality. Again, it's because the reality is going to be in being in touch with your content, and formal laws are
Right.
kind of out of touch with their content.
Am I incorrect in thinking that this is the first time he's ever really completely and totally emphasized content so much? That's because it's a word we banter about quite a bit in all of our groups, content, but it's not something that Hegel's actually addressed so specifically before.
No, I think he did. I think he did back when we were talking about force and understanding.
Okay.
Yeah, when he first introduced the concept of law, or the idea of law, that
Okay.
he was talking about, they are without content. And I think that was
okay.
emphasized,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
But here in the
Okay.
Encyclopedia Logic, he talks a lot about it too. In my
Well, yeah, but he in the last paragraph that I read, he says, this is something that we have to study in speculative philosophy. That's the logic.
yeah, well, he talks about the difference between that's where I got that distinction. He talks about mere correctness versus, maybe you weren't here when Philip and I were talking about that, but the difference between mere correctness and truth in
Yeah.
Encyclopedia Logic, he cashes out as the correctness is just the representation. Does the representation correspond to its object that it's trying to represent? That's just mere correctness. Truth is the correspondence of the object with itself or its concept.
Hmm.
And so if it's going to be corresponding, and here he's going to figure out that, he's bootstrapping content here because he's saying that the form is the content, well, I think about halfway down or towards the end of the paragraph here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure
Right.
if this helps, but in one of the previous paragraphs, he goes into number and its relation to genus. I think genus as a simple one reflected into itself doesn't have the capacity to differentiate itself into the qualitative moments that are determinations. So the number is sort of abstracted from quality, and you have that structure of life as not in the world, but the life process taken independently of the world, which limits its activity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think the concept of the simple genus that observing reason has cannot produce self-consciousness because it has nothing to actually be reflected. It has no way for content to be reflected into itself, only for number to be reflected into itself. In a
I
sense.
see. Yeah, that kind of goes along. I can't really totally comment on this because I don't understand it very well. But the structure of the logic, is he starts off with being, and then he gets to and then being is transcended for essence, and essential relations are always have their content outside of themselves, right? The essence and its instantiations are always somehow separate. And then we go to the culmination of the logic, the subjective logic, and one of the highest logical forms of thought is genus. So genus is more logical than essence, which is to say it has more reality in it. And so I always have that in my back of my mind when I'm thinking about what he's saying about genus here. And so we want to privilege essence, but essence is so to speak, in the middle of the hierarchy, and genus, and then ultimately, well, knowledge will be the highest, right? Absolute knowledge, and that will spill over into nature and space and time and stuff. But
And actuality is the kind of the bridge between the major sections there, right? At the end of the
yes,
objective logic. And he brings up actuality here in somewhere in our reading. That just clicked in my brain.
so to think in terms of essences is still logically inadequate. And when we start thinking in terms of genus, as it's appropriately understood, we are, so to speak, close to the pinnacle of the logic, and really getting things. So I just don't want us to accidentally think that, genus is somehow less important than essence, which it felt like it in that first paragraph. But the way observing reason thinks genus is inadequate. All right, sorry. 299.
So sorry, it's just so stupid, but I'm just kidding. So observing reason, it's just a type of reason.
Mhm.
This is as far as reason's gotten along here. All I can do is observe.
Right. I mean, what's nice about it is that it basically captures modern scientific reason, because modern scientific reason, right, our use of the word reason always relates to either natural science or to mathematics, right? And so, right, and
So
so,
this captures, like, so observing reason in Hegel is the same as Schmidt's modern rationality.
I think so, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, all right.
I think that's why it's quantitative rather than qualitative, or it keeps the two apart in a way that prevents it from making sense of things.
Mm.
Well, I mean, as an
Yeah.
observer, it's a step away from what it's observing, so it objectifies what it reasons.
Not only
And-
objectifies, that would be good, but it quantifies, right?
Yes.
It abandons content to quality that it can't get a handle on, right? Because quality is self-conscious, right? There's no quality without consciousness, right? And so quality is part of the lived relation to the world, and reason is not thinking that way, right? It's thinking objective relations out there. So since it never gets at necessary contents, it seeks necessity elsewhere, namely in numerical relations. And that's why, we have the reign of the quantitative.
This is why it kind of collapses into a tautological structure.
Exactly.
Like in De Koenig.
Right? I mean, it's very important. In early modern science, one of the first things is to say, well, there's primary and secondary qualities, right? And the primary qualities are like color and sound and stuff like that. But secondary qualities are things that numbers can be about, like extension and distance and stuff like that. So whatever this, so primary qualities are what natural science is all about, right? Because it's mathematizable. Whereas secondary qualities, I think I might have initially said that backwards, right? Secondary qualities are things that relate to our sense organs. And so they're not, since our sense organs come after the things, right? There's the things, and then there's our perceptions of things. And so if we peel away our perceptions of things, those secondary qualities, then all we have are its non-perceptual essence. It's pure extension, it's pure space and time and whatever. I don't remember exactly what the list of primary qualities were that early modern science and early modern philosophy affected.
Impenetrability was one, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is that there's no quality. I mean, to call that which corresponds to numbers
Yes.
a primary quality is cheating with language. Because qualities are always related to perception. And right. So reasons, yeah, anyway, okay, enough. I think you understand my point.
No, sorry, it's like Greek and Roman sport is not quantitative. Modern sport is almost wholly quantitative.
Well, you still have the rules of the game, but how are you
Yeah,
making
the
this?
rules of the game, but you have, like, the Greek and Roman sport, there's nothing like this team scored 5 and this team scored 3. There's nothing like
Ah,
that. There's
for real?
nothing like that.
Oh, I had no idea. That's interesting.
And therefore, the even though they bet on like who was going to win at the Hippodrome and everything, this massive expansion of sports betting, which is all quantitative.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's the translation of everything. What did Marx called money the universal solvent?
Yeah,
It dissolves everything.
Liquid,
It takes the qualitative nature of
yeah.
everything away from it, right? So he
Yep.
saw the problem of quantity as affected human life, not just through science, but through economic organization. I mean, whatever you think of it, I think it's brilliant. It's a brilliant insight.
Yeah, the
Yeah, but-
exchange value versus
Yeah.
Yeah.
use
But
value.
it's not as though the Greeks and Romans didn't mint coin, which are definitely countable.
Well, not every one of them were philosophers. Only most of them. No, I guess not very many of them if we were to believe Plato and Aristotle. All right, yeah. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Okay.
Speak of the coin, that's right here in 299. He uses the coin metaphor.
Yeah, but before that, he says, to say they have no reality generally means nothing but they are without truth.
Right.
But nonetheless, to be formally true. They're not entirely out of truth. They have formal truth, but not real truth.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not the way most people talk about like logic these days. You know, it's just, it's not one of the, it's not real. It's just the way we organize things, or it's the way we classify things, or something like that, right? So I think people are incredibly far too comfortable with this idea that there is something, but it's, and there is something that's distinguishable from anything else, and yet it's not real, because that's what how thought is always thought today.
Wow.
And so we have this weird concept of reality now that only includes certain things that are, but doesn't include other things that are.
including
Right?
necessary conditions for the things
Yeah.
that are.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't quite get the estrangement thing. I mean, it's
No,
obviously harking back to earlier sections there. Yeah. But that's a form of negativity. It's a specific form of negativity.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think, isn't it just that, you know, pure form as having no content, wouldn't content be a stranger to it? Wouldn't it be alien to it, be other
So
foreign
it's the estrangement of content, is what you're
to
saying.
form? Right, exactly.
I think it's similar to the concept being empty in Kant.
Exactly. I think so
Well, he
too.
said, but wait a minute, it says it is an empty, so the purely formal without reality is itself a thought thing. That is an empty abstraction without any estrangement in it.
Right. Okay. So right. So the German is Entzweiung, right? Which is shit. He used that in a much earlier chapter, and I had a good translation for it. But it's, you know, Entzweiung has the word zwei inside of it, like two, right? So
Dividing
yeah.
Estrangement meaning making two. Is that the
Right. But I mean, what we have to think of, I think this estrangement is there's no inner difference, right? So the simple concept has inner difference, right? But the formal logic doesn't have, or the formal thought here doesn't have inner difference. And so it's not intrinsically related to any particular content. Content always comes to it from the outside.
Right. So its emptiness is, if it had inner differentiation, it would have to have a content.
Right.
And this is kind of one of the problems with Kant. You have these concepts that are differentiated in themselves, but they're supposed to have no content at the same time.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, so this is like, he's talking about pure reason, right? This is his critique of Kant's critique of pure reason.
Yes.
So without any
Well, this-
estrangement in it, there's going to be no movement in this formal thing, right? Because the movement's going to come from the the strange parts banging into each other, or
Mhm.
arguing, or whatever you want to call it.
Right. It's going to be me as a thoughtless thing taking formal thought that is outside of any content and somehow applying it to something that is purely content, but not having form. But obviously I can't have that thought, right? Because thought isn't intrinsically related to any content, right? So somehow I have to be outside of this formal thinking and then apply logic to it. And that reminds us that, how am I applying if I don't have a logic to apply things to, like a method for applying certain structures to certain things, right? This whole conception is obviously incredibly incoherent, but I get excited about it because it's the way in which 99.9% of people for the last 200 years have talked about thought incredibly incoherently.
Yeah, how could you have a test in your formal logic class if there were no content? It's almost like you have to abstract ad infinitum to get to a point where there is no content. So
Right.
You just hand in your blank test
Exactly.
and you get 100.
And not only no answers, but you have to erase the questions too.
yeah, so going the opposite direction from that, then I think Hegel's point is that it is nothing else but the content itself. When you introduce this estrangement, that really what you're abstracting as formal logic that doesn't have content is in fact thought itself, the content of thought the content and form of thought thinking itself.
Right. On the other side of the coin, while they are the laws of pure thinking, and pure thinking is in itself the universal, and is thus knowing that immediately has being, identity of being and thinking, and thereby has all reality in it. It's not limited from the outside. Though these laws are absolute concepts, and they are inseparably the essentialities both of form and of things. Right. So here he's giving, so to speak, the Hegelian concept as what he calls the other side of the coin.
You summarized two of his phrases as something. You said all reality in it, and you said that means what was it?
Something like it's not limited from the outside, maybe.
Oh, limit, right? And
right.
And immediately was the
oh yeah. The sameness of being and thinking, the Parmenidean thesis. Since universality, which moves itself within itself, right? It's simple reflection into itself. So it's always already on the other side of itself in what it thinks. And what it thinks is always already in on the other side, namely in that which thinks. And so this difference is always already canceled. In thinking, the act of thinking is the cancellation of this abstract difference. Right.
So that's not, the last part of that says, rather, it is essentially the form itself, for the latter is nothing but the universal dividing itself into its pure moment. So it's not like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like we should say there's no legitimacy to formal logic, but it's just the recognition that elucidating or thinking formal logic is thinking. It is not an abstraction from it.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, yeah, but yeah, exactly.
The rules for symbol swapping, right, are kind of nothing without those who understand what it is to have rules for symbol swapping.
Yeah.
And why these rules. So the idea of a kind of formal logic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was what was the example? I think I used Socrates with the bad Phil, right? All men are mortal, but you have to understand that men is plural of man.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand what formal logic is doing, not just what formal logic's superficial structure is. And
Right.
But even when you're thinking the so-called superficial structure, I mean, just calling it superficial is just a misunderstanding of what it is. It is thought thinking itself, and it is the being of thought, or maybe not being isn't the right word there, but it is the it is thought happening.
Yeah, it is thought happening, but it's not just, but it's also more, right? And that's been introduced by observing consciousness, that thinks of logic as one of the many things out there that it can think about that is somehow separate from its thought.
Mhm.
And when that happens, right, then we have distinctions that are treated as separate things. Yeah, just like the universals, not and the singular, and I don't know. I mean, I don't have that stuff at my fingertips, but
No, I get what you're saying, but it's interesting to me. I was thinking about this yesterday, that we've really lost the word out. What is it, Aufbegung or whatever the sublation?
yeah.
He's not bringing up that word very much anymore. But really, I still think it's effective in what he's saying. So even though we basically would sublate formal logic into a knowing that when we are doing formal logic, like in some kind of a class, or we're applying it to whether or not we're thinking straight, or we're even using it to try to get our thoughts clear about a complicated subject, we sublate that. We understand that it's not like we're trying to understand something outside. We're trying to understand a self-relation. The world as it is,
Yeah.
rather than as we abstract it away. That's how I would take it. Like that's how I take science now. I mean, assuming that I'm thinking with my Hegel hat on, which I backslide quite a bit, but and I would think that formal logic is the same thing. It's not like it doesn't have some sort of utility.
Indeed.
But
Okay.
it's not the utility of understanding,
Right.
discrete things out there. It's more of understanding the world as it is.
Right. I mean, obviously it's useful, but the philosophical problem is thinking whether it's an adequate account of thought or not. And thought as living, simple self-reflection always evades this formal framework. It's always foreign to it, right? And so, yeah, so that's the mistake, to think that, we have a theory of thought that actually accounts for thought, and it's these rules of calculation that logic give us, right, to derive true conclusions from true premises. And that lends credence to the idea that thought is fundamentally calculation, and that calculating machines are thinking. and Hegel points out the problem with that here early on.
it's kind of like formal logic is treated like a sail.
Is that why I saw that boat on your screen there for a little?
Yes.
Oh, and you're talking about the Parmenides?
Yeah, I couldn't help myself.
Okay, well, you better explain that to everybody who doesn't have the Parmenides fresh in their mind, like you guys.
Well, Socrates is giving an account of the forms, and Parmenides is kind of, I guess, just laying into him about it. And one of the ways he treats the forms, right, as if they're another thing that makes sense of other things. And so the forms cover all of these other things, which all get a part of it.
Right.
Kind of like a sail can cover multiple people, but nobody is covered by the whole sail, and the whole sail is separate from the things. So you have this spatialization of it, or this externality of it to what it's supposed to account for.
Right. Yeah, no, I like that spatiality metaphor because, whenever something is considered abstractly separate rather than distinct, one always thinks one can localize it in space, which is why you can localize. One thinks that, once thought is abstracted in this way, then you can localize it in certain neuron processes or something like that. There's logic. There it is. It's happening right in those places because we don't understand the difference between separation and distinction. And so we spatialize non-spatial things. There it is.
And is that a problem just for metaphysics, or, I mean, obviously that as an account of metaphysical reality isn't adequate per Hegel's analysis, but when you're not doing metaphysics, when you're not trying to get to the fundamental root of things metaphysically,
right?
Is there a problem using formal logic, or is there a
No.
problem inspecting an object with numerical quantities?
No.
Right. So,
but that's always been my point. It's not that I hate science. It's just that science isn't metaphysics, but everybody wants to make science metaphysics.
Right. So really, what we're talking about are just problems of metaphysics. We're not really talking about practical problems with science or formal logic.
Right. Just the inflationary claims that come from people involved in the scientific mathematical world, right? Because instead of tutoring their minds on Hegelian, Aristotelian, Kantian logics, right? They just think that they can generalize science and that's all the logic they need, right? But that just means they have absolutely no awareness of like categorical differences or, what do quantities and qualities, I mean, how do they relate, Well,
yeah, and I think we have discussed in the past where, not seeing things for what they are is problematic in a practical sense, in practical senses.
Yeah.
I just, I think we talked about race is one of those things, but I'm still not quite clear on the where that, where when I'm using a Hegelian understanding of self-consciousness or spirit, that I come to a better conclusion about something in my life, as opposed to when I'm just kind of going by the zeitgeist of the modern empirical age. I don't quite see it yet, but I guess there would be, because well, anyway, that's a tangent. We shouldn't get onto a tangent, but anyway.
Well, I mean, I just to boil it down to a simple metaphor, that it becomes easier and easier to discern snake oil, but false panaceas, right? And I think that's a very, very important part of philosophy, is not embracing some absolute truth, to use parlance that's common today, but to recognize the inadequacy of those things that are posited as what's best for humans or what's real and all the rest of it. When you can start seeing through that, right? You already gained. You've saved yourself a lot of self-harm by taking these false paths.
Right, but again, it is still at a metaphysical level. Like in this particular paragraph, he's talking about, let's make sure that we don't abstract formal logic away from thinking itself. which is kind of the form and the content of what is true.
Yeah.
But that's still that doesn't that's just metaphysical. It still doesn't tell me, that it doesn't help me in terms of, oh, if I'm thinking, whatever I'm thinking is okay, because I'm thinking. I mean, it doesn't help with that problem.
Right. Well, yeah, but what does? I mean, if you're that undifferentiated in your thinking, I mean, the only just go to school just practice thinking for a little while. All right. Sorry. Have we exhausted 299 more or less? Maybe we jump to 300. Just if we need to go back to 299, we can.
Yeah, I'm for making some progress. We can't
Okay,
get
cool.
every last little drop of blood out
Indeed.
of each
All right.
paragraph. But
Oh, now we start getting into motion and motionlessness that Tyler brought up. So just as this form, right? So we're talking about the universal, which moves within itself and therefore is its own content. And since its own content, since thought as universal, the content it would have is universal content and therefore all content. Right, that when observation turns to this, right, it finds content, right? It finds content in itself, right? Because observing always finds things. It never properly knows them. It just finds them in front of itself. Isn't that like a trick question, a sophist question that happens a lot? The drunken philosophers, is it found or made when they ask about like universal, I don't know, just like philosophical things. It's like the dilemma. Is it found or made, right?
are you just making up those concepts, or did you actually discover them?
Yeah, exactly. So this is observing reason at work, folks, trying to create a logical trap, not realizing its own limitations. Okay. And here we have existence, right? I want only existing content. What's the German? Sein. So, yeah. English always introduces that extra element of existence when the German and the Greek is usually just being. So the content becomes a motionless being of relations, right? And that's just all the logical laws, the rules of syllogism or whatever.
So this, it does say here, let's see, where is that? What is declared to be a fixed and constant law in itself can be only a moment of the unity reflecting itself into itself. It can come under the scene only as a vanishing magnitude. However, if in the course of being studied, they are torn away from the context of movement and are arranged as singulars, then these determinatenesses are not lacking in content, since they in fact have a determinate content. I read all of that just to draw attention to the fact that in the first sentence he uses moment, in the second he uses movement, and it's kind of starting to dawn on me, I guess, that moment and movement are really synonymous.
Yeah.
Was it the moments that move? Unless you have
Well, the
multiple
moments
moments,
are the
you can't have the
movements.
movement.
The moments are the movements. It's not like one is abstracted from the other, right?
That's right. They've already gone into their other. Right. So in a sense, they're not moving, but they have moved. Right? It's participial.
In German, is there this etymological relation in the two terms, or
No,
it's just
no.
accidental that moment and movement are in translation so
Right.
suspiciously similar in
Right.
form.
Yeah, I think he's just drawing on the idea of a moment of time is over as it's comes into being. It's already over, and
Yeah, and but also it's that it's not a fixed static
right.
point.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a movement of one into another, and vice versa.
Exactly. Okay, so what does it mean by they lack form? In what Tim just read? I'm not tracking that particular point he's making here. So being torn away from the context of movement and arranged as singulars. So right, universals, singulars, particulars, blah blah blah, different logical laws. So they're all separated out from one another now, and you can almost lay them out like on a on a laboratory table, right? And there's that there, and there's that there. So there's been spatialized, right? Now they have content because each one is different from the others through its being what it is, its essence, right? So it has content, but what they lack is form, which is their essence.
Well, that's kind of interesting because usually I've always thought of form as the abstraction. Well, I don't know. Content and form is an interesting distinction, because when you take an abstraction, in a way, you're taking out the content and the form.
Mm-hmm.
The form resides in the essence of the thing from which the abstraction has been made.
Right.
But that's also the content. If it's abstract, an abstraction has no content. But then what you just said implies that content is what differentiates the abstractions from one another.
Mm.
And it's the form, that their loss of form, that makes them abstractions. So that's almost like the opposite.
Yeah, but people do talk about like the form of the argument, and that only certain logical forms yield valid conclusions, right? And so now we have all these things that are only what they are in their interrelations, right? They're all reflected into one another, but now they've been separated out, right? And what makes them true is precisely the way in which they're interrelated, but having been laid out, they're just contents, but they don't have the form, because they are only what they are, right? The universal is only what it is in relationship to the particular and the singular. And if you separate them out as three separate things, right, then you've taken their form away, which is to be interrelated in specific ways to arrive at true conclusions.
So in themselves, they are nothing.
Right.
They are only what they are in virtue of being for
Right.
and in another.
Right. It's laid out as specimens, their content, but they seem to have content, but their only content is the way in which they're interrelated to one another, and not the way in which they're made separate from one another.
So to understand that as form, true form entails interrelatedness.
But at least we're talking about, I wouldn't make that general point, although it probably is correct, but here definitely, right, we have the laws of thought as one content, the laws of thought, all of them. And then we break those laws into separate laws, and those separate laws into separate components, right? We analyze it into pieces. And now we don't have the content that we started with, namely the laws of thought, right? We have all these unrelated pieces or parts. And we have a heap of logic now. Be right back.
So in this case, system is form.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like that structure, even we've been seeing the same structure throughout the book, right? You've got form, or you've got oppositions that are treated as if they can be separate from each other.
The only reason you're seeing that throughout the whole book there, Tyler, is because that is your form of thinking about the book. Obviously, you see
Of
yourself
course.
in it.
That is the essence of the book. What they lack is form, which is their essence. So this is the essence of the phenomenology.
I disappeared for a second though. Where are we?
Bottom of page 175.
All right.
I
Any
just saw
more
that this Kantian thing in there
in paragraph
because it
300?
is in their determinateness, or just as a content from which the form has been taken that they are supposed to. So the content from which the form has been taken sounds like appearance, the undetermined object of. It seems to be a parallel there with the Kantian appearance.
Well, isn't in Kant the content what the object is that we can never what we can never know, but the form. Well, no, that's not
The
really
content
the
comes
right-
from sensibility.
Yeah.
Sense your sense data is roughly your content, and we have the forms of
Right.
intuition as well, but then your concept is the form that schematized through time and all that.
But in Kant, the noumenal is neither form nor content, right?
It's
Well,
unspeakable, roughly.
I mean, in principle, the noumenal has content, but we can't know it. But we provide the content through the manifest, the manifold.
Yeah, I just point out that you're the one that brought in the term noumena. I use the term appearance. Just
Right. But the appearance is the appearance of the noumenal, right?
no.
It's the phenomena. The phenomenal is the appearance of the noumenal in Kant.
I don't think he can't say that.
Exactly.
And when he introduces the term appearance in the aesthetic, he does it without reference to the noumenal, and he doesn't need to. He's basically saying that there's part of if you're cognizing an object, part of that input, so to speak, comes from the sensation, part of it comes from the understanding. And if you want to think of it without reference to the conceptual part, that is roughly what appearance is. Considering an object of cognition only from the point of view of its sensible content, roughly.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that, I mean, Tim, what you're saying, we wouldn't need the phenomena noumena distinction if we could say that the phenomena are just the way noumena appear. Because then we'd know the noumena, because we just infer from appearance what noumena are. And
well, if we were true gods, we would intuit. Sensible intuition has this problem. Direct intuition, or whatever God's intuition is, doesn't have this problem because there's no difference between what is intuited and what is, so to speak.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, the Copernican revolution was all about making a connection between the noumenal and the phenomenal through the kind of the apparatus of the manifold, in a sense. So, I mean, Kant, I mean, we're not on Kant right now, but I always took it to be that the intuition was of the noumenal, but we provide the content of, the intuition provides the content, or the understanding provides the content, and the intuition is of the noumenal, which apart from what we bring to it, we can't know, which is everything.
Well, we'll just have to disagree on our interpretation of Kant and move on, because this is
Yeah,
Hegel
okay.
class, right? So,
All right.
I do think so. The idea of sort of divine intuiting mind has kind of the same structure as Parmenides' object in Aristotle, because it's something which is so static that it could not think itself, because it has no lack, right? It has no negation to it.
I mean, it's still, Parmenides does say being and thought are the same. So.
Well, this is Aristotle's critique.
Oh, I
of
see.
it.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure how exactly. It's what Aristotle thinks Parmenides commits himself to.
Parmenides certainly doesn't say being and thought are two different things.
Right.
He only speaks about one.
Sorry. Somebody's knocking at my door.
Observation is not knowing itself, but doesn't know that it's not knowing. So observation inverts its nature, which obviously harkens back to, I guess, the inverted world. And I'm just trying to wonder if there's the same structure there with how observation is inverting itself with the inverted world inversion.
I think that sounds right to me, but I'd have to go.
Where are we?
Top of 176, sort of the last
Right.
last bit of 300.
Does he introduce anything new in this last part of the paragraph?
The inverted observational world.
Oh. However, observation is not knowing itself, and it does not recognize, right? That's the self-reflected concept, and it does not recognize that it is not knowing, right? It's just finding things. Rather, observation inverts its nature into the shape of being, i.e., it grasps its negativity only as laws of being. Okay. So its nature is to be simple reflection into itself, which is not inert being, right, as just abstract and different from everything else.
Right, it inverts its nature from being free to being fixed.
Exactly.
Right.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And so is this parallel to the inverted world earlier on or not?
I don't think
An analogous
I
mistake?
can't wrap my mind around that inverted world right now to be able to answer
I know,
affirmatively or negatively, because that's a hell of a pretzel in your head to get. Or to actually, to make. I have to hope maybe I'll have the time to think about that today. I hope.
Well, then for us today, it's the subverted world.
Very good.
All right. So here he said, then it's a sufficient, blah, blah, blah. The rest we'd have to pursue. We'd have to be reading the logic right now to pursue this theme. Right. He says it's enough to point this out. Right. The so-called laws of thinking on the basis of the universal. Sufficient to point out the invalidity of the so-called laws of thinking on the basis of the universal nature of what is at issue. What is he even saying there?
Well, the laws of nature are all particular, isolated, given things, and they don't have that universal nature. Well, no, that doesn't make sense.
Well, he says the universal nature of what is at issue, which I
Right.
think has to be something beyond the fixed determinations that it reduces things to. So the laws of thinking that are fixed determinations they cannot be a valid explanation of the relationship between content and form. It turns, effectively, it turns content or movement into static form in order to, in an attempt to explain form. So it is kind of like the inverted world where you've got the domain of appearances, and then you've got what appears, but then what appears is just as fixed as the world of appearances. And it doesn't
The laws
explain
of nature are just one, or the random expression of the freedom of life, or the concept running up against the particularity of the earth meets in one, the current situation we have here. But describing the current situation we have here doesn't obviously capture the universality of that banging of universal life against a particular earth.
Take it easy.
Right. Yes. So we kind of get the fixed observed moments, right, are explained through a law that is itself reduced to fixed
It's a
observed
description,
moments.
not a law, really.
Yeah, it is a description. It's for everything. It is kind of like in the Parmenides too, where we have for everything there is a form. It's
Well,
that kind of mistake.
Socrates didn't go quite that far.
Well, yeah, but they consider that problem. So if everything has its own form, right, you kind of have that structure where every fixed determination of that's observed, right, is given laws that are just as unnecessary.
Well, I just noticed that what's parallel here is what he says is the shape of being, and he says, i.e., the laws of being. So shape and laws are, so that laws are the abstracted form, assuming that shape is a synonym of form. So that's where being is the content and laws are the form.
I think he's using shape a little more particularly, because earlier, several paragraphs back, he's always talking about shape as this external, the externality of what's really conceptually united. It's just this external accident, roughly. And so that's the same sort of thing here. The laws are really the external shape of what is really a free internal movement.
Yeah, right? which is ironic, right? Because if you consider that accidental shape, these laws are really just accidental. They're not really laws. They're just accidents of accidental abstractions that you're mistaking from.
Right. Because there's this one particular situation, and you described that one situation, but had been a different situation, the thing you were trying to describe and get lawful would have reacted differently because it was free. Yeah, right.
Charming remarks and interesting, whatever it was. Yeah. And it does have the sale structure again, because the shape is a kind of external thing that's supposed to explain other external things to it.
Let's read a little bit more since we have some time and we want to prove to ourselves we're capable of making progress.
We're manly Hegelians that can do many paragraphs.
Exactly, but somebody else got to read now. 301. Let's read 301 and 302 together.
Logic
301 was my Quine's logic class where we went through methods of logic. Anyway.
So I can read
Awesome.
one or both.
Just go ahead and read both.
Peter wants to do 301 because it was a special class.
Just read.
Okay.
Nobody really likes to read, so stop offering it. Just
all right.
Gird up your loins.
Hopefully my dog doesn't bark, but okay. This negative unity of thinking is for itself, or it is instead being for itself, the principle of individuality, and within its reality, it is an active consciousness. Observing consciousness will thus, by the very nature of the matter which is at issue, be guided towards it according to its being the reality of those laws. While the way this all hangs together is not something which itself is for observing consciousness, the observing consciousness supposes that in the laws of thinking, thinking itself in one respect stands off to the side to observational consciousness, and in another respect, thinking acquires another way of being in what is now to observing region, consciousness the object, namely the acting consciousness, which is for itself in such a way that it sublates otherness and has its actuality in this intuition of itself as the negative. And then do you want me to continue?
Yeah, please.
For observation, a new field is thus opened up in the acting actuality of consciousness. Psychology contains the class of laws according to which spirit conducts itself in various ways towards the various modes of its actuality as an only found otherness. In part, spirit receives these into itself so that it comes to be according to these only unearthed habits, mores, and ways of thinking as the kinds of items within which it is to itself as actuality and as an object. In part, it knows itself to be self-active against them, and with inclination and passion, it selects out for itself only what is particular in them, and thus makes what is objective come to be adequate to itself. In the former, it conducts itself negatively towards itself as singularity, and in the latter, it conducts itself negatively towards itself as universal being. According to the first aspect, self-sufficiency gives to that which is only found the form of conscious individuality as such, and in view of the content, it remains within the bounds of the only found universal actuality. However, according to the other aspect, it at least gives universal actuality a distinctive modification which does not contradict its essential content.
Comma.
Or else it also gives it the kind of modification by which the individual, as particular actuality and distinctive content, opposes itself to that individual or to that universal actuality, and as the individual sublates that universal actuality in only singular manner, that opposition becomes a crime. But when it does so in a universal manner which thereby acts for all, it brings about another world, other rights, other laws, and other mores, which replace what had been present.
Awesome. Let's see.
Can we actually read that 303 with that? Because I think that sort of blends in, and then
Go
it's
for
a
it.
304 that there's a transition made. Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and read it. Observational psychology, which at first expresses its perceptions of the universal modes which present themselves for it in active consciousness, discovers all sorts of faculties, inclinations, and passions. And while in its recounting of this collection, the recollection of the unity of self-consciousness does not allow itself to be suppressed, observational psychology must at least get to the point of being astonished that in spirit, so many sorts of contingent things of so many heterogeneous sorts can be alongside one another in the way they would be in a sack, especially since they show themselves to be not motionless dead things, but to be instead restless movements.
Awesome. The spirit sack, famous metaphor.
There does seem to be a little bit of a Humean thing going on in here, right?
A Humean?
Yes.
Uh,
The unearthed mores, habits, etc.
I pronounce that mores. I'm not sure if because it's in, yeah, it's like moral
Oh yeah,
custom.
more. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I was taught in school anyway, all these modernists, that it was pronounced Moors.
For
But
real?
I've heard it said mores, but I will.
Okay, well, I take it back. I've never heard it pronounced any other way. So
I've
besides
always heard it
mores.
mores.
All right, so we're split. So
I've heard it both
however you
ways,
want.
but I've always said Moors. I don't know why.
Okay, well then just go for it, man.
S'mores are what
Those
you
of
have at
us
a
who were raised
campfire.
in Oregon, maybe that's.
I was too, yeah, but. Okay, yeah. I will never correct you on this word again, Tyler, because I thought it was something you were unfamiliar with, but you did it just right. Okay.
Well, we don't know whether I did it right, basically.
Well, this is a word where there can be no wrong. So it's automatically right. All right. What do we just go through here? I mean, it seems like he's describing this observation of inverting its nature. He's giving us more flesh to that to that thought. Okay, so 301, it's Hegel kind of standing outside and saying, you know, the way in which all this hangs together is not something which itself is for observing consciousness, right? So that's not development of the concept here, but Hegel giving us some observations from outside to help us understand what will come. The observing consciousness supposes that in the laws of thinking, thinking itself in one respect stands off to the side to observational consciousness, right? Because it observes, and so it's observing thought. So thought's over there, and I'm here, right? In another respect, thinking acquires another way of being, and what is now to observing consciousness the object, namely the acting consciousness, which is for itself in such a way that it sublates otherness and has its actuality in this intuition itself of itself as the negative, right? So observational consciousness, thinking its object, thinks itself as thinking, and thus being another kind of thinking or another being of thought than the thinking that is under the investigation. So thought is there as object, but it is also there as subject in observing reason itself. And since it's not observing itself thinking, right, it's only appreciated negatively, right? It's not the thinking that I'm investigating in my object. It's not that. So it's just the net. And so at this point, all we have is a negative description of observing reason's own thinking. It's not that over there that what I'm investigating.
Right, and it hasn't found an object that's adequate to it, which is very similar to seeking the unconditioned, but thought doesn't recognize itself as being unconditioned because
Right.
there's this other content which is outside it.
Right.
Right, yeah, so it knows itself to be self-active against them.
Yes. And it's that, so to speak, it's that self-misunderstanding that opens up a field of inquiry. I love it. I mean, it's so brutally ironic. It's only on the basis of a misunderstanding that psychology is a science.
That's great.
Oh, yes. Okay. Okay, I just transitioned to 302. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about 301 anymore, or if you want to point something out in 302 that continues the point he was making in 301. When he's talking about spirit, right, he's obviously not talking about anything that observing reason either knows about itself or knows about its object. Right? But in a sense, spirit's already making an appearance, is coming onto the scene, right, as being the unity of the thinking that thinks itself as its object, and the unity with the thinking that just thinks itself. So that what makes those two one, that's spirit. And so spirit is already on the scene, but observing reason can't observe spirit any more than it can observe life. And so it thinks of, right, it thinks of these as ontological, or as a different kind of being, right? There's the thought, the formal static thought over there, that's my object. And there's the, and it's passive with respect to my thinking it, and my thought is active, right? And but we don't have any determinations of what that activity actually is, and that the activity is actually the activity. I mean, the object is included in that activity, but for observing reason, these are two separate beings, right? The active thought and the passive thought that it thinks about.
Yeah, it's kind of broken down into faculties or
Yeah.
apparatus at this point. So because we have the active and the passive, just like in Kant.
Well, I mean, I don't know if he gets into talking about psychology much more in this book, but apart from the point that he makes about, you know, turning thought in an individual into kind of laws of psychology. I'm kind of wondering if, I mean, I can't deny that there are pathologies and that I've met people that have them. I mean, what are we to say?
No, this is just rational psychology, right? Reason looking at itself from a psychological vantage point. So rational psychology would be the inquiry into all the capacities of mind that are necessary for coming to knowledge of the world. So that's, rational psychology is one of, what Kant called the theory of the soul. It's not the kind of psychology that that you're thinking of, which is science of pathologies.
Oh, okay, so but what is Hegel talking about in this
Rational
passage?
psychology.
Oh, he is. Oh,
I think so, right? But okay, but maybe the interpretation will prove me wrong. But it seems to me that right, because the first object of this psychology is the laws of thought, and not like aberrant behaviors, which obviously presupposes a norm of health and well-being. Right, that's not the kind of thing he's after here.
so is he using the term psychology? Oh, so it is kind of the philosophy of mind.
Yeah, exactly.
I see.
Yeah, so Wolf, so Christian Wolff, right, he determines the three objects of metaphysics, right, the study of, one is rational psychology, rational cosmology, and rational theology.
I see. Oh, well, that helps a bit with that, answering my concern there.
So
Okay,
this is very anti-Aristotelian in this form, because you have the science of the mind as a separate science from the other science, rather than there being a logical hierarchy. With, of course, the mind, the science of the mind properly understood being at the top, because all other sciences require it to be scientific.
Mm-hmm. Right. So all these different faculties that rational psychology is going to pull out of the spirit sack and take a look at, they're all just juxtaposed to one another. There's no logical order to them, and there's no and so there's no hierarchy of cognitive capacities that Aristotle talks about, right? So that yeah, okay, never mind. But I'm just putting your point, Tyler, the way in terms of what I think I understand.
Yeah, I think that's the case, and it's a similar thing when we have all the philosophy of X and Y and Z, and they're all
all
separate.
juxtaposed. That's right. all jostling about in the spirit sack. I love that metaphor. I'm gonna overuse it.
Well, it's a good thing that Hegel didn't entitle his book "The Philosophy of Spirit,"
Yeah.
because you know.
There's a section of encyclopedia. So,
Oh, it is.
yeah.
And is that a critique of this kind of approach, or does he consider the phenomenology of spirit to be the philosophy of mind?
That's a super interesting and very controversial question.
Okay. I would assume that he doesn't, because that would kind of isolate the mind off as something different from kind of the theory of everything, or the phenomenology of the one that he is doing right now.
That's interesting, because the phenomenology does appear in the encyclopedia in the philosophy of spirit, but only the sections and up to reason, and after that, all the rest disappears. So in the philosophy of spirit, you get consciousness, self-consciousness, and reason. And so, it's a big thing in scholarship, what happened? Did he change his mind about the phenomenology, or why is it truncated in the philosophy of spirit? Or does the philosophy of spirit not able to is not able to get a handle on what happens in the spirit chapters of the phenomenology that gets then distributed elsewhere, and the logic and stuff? Yeah, so some people say that there's a systematic flaw to the way in which Hegel constructed the whole thing, and other people say, well, he changed his mind about what the role of the phenomenology is. And anyway, yeah, so I just want to say it's a very controversial question.
Oh, okay.
And so there's no easy answer. So you can ask it the rest of your life and you'll never exhaust it.
Right, but if I study hard enough, I might come to my own conclusion and be one of the arguers, right?
Just do the phenomenology / logic construction right on your own.
Exactly.
Independent of Hegel. Right, so it's finding all these really cool things inside of itself, right? Customs, habits, mores, ways of thinking. And then so here you get a little bit further into empirical psychology, the way, for instance, Hume was doing it. I think that's what Tyler meant, thinking Hume.
Yeah, I think there's some extra there, because I can't think of the names, but when it brings about another world, other rights, other laws, and other mores or mores, which replace what had been present, you kind of get the same kind of ceaseless modern activity of replacing things with no real underlying principle.
See, I was thinking about Kant's kingdom of ends there. I don't know if anybody else thought of that when he, right? So we have the actual thought that is mired in customs and habits and stuff like that, right? But reflection on the moral law projects an ideal moral kingdom, which is just the law, the moral law as such, right? And that regulates rationally all the relations between people, right? And that's and that world is never realizable in Kant, right? It's a universal approximation to the kingdom of ends, but we never actually can get there because of its ideal status. So that's what I was thinking, but I could be wrong on that. I just want to remind people that there is that construction that Hegel's always railing against, just like there's the noumena that we never get to, there's the moral world we never get to, there's the just world we never get to, right? It's all this what's it called? These infinite approximations, these asymptotic curves.
Promised lands we never get to.
Exactly.
So I mean, we have described Hegel as kind of a journey, in the sense that this book is a journey of sublations. And we eventually wind up at, spirit or the absolute. And that's sort of an ideal, but it's not. So from what I hear you say, that's not really an ideal that's out there that we're journeying toward.
Right.
It's really what Hegel is talking about is the here and now understood the right way.
Yeah.
So this is it. This is spirit.
Right.
Spirit is at work. So we're not actually trying to achieve anything but understanding and knowledge of what is.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly
So
right.
what is the understanding and knowledge of what is?
The simple concept. Duh.
So yeah, there are a lot of principles for action, which are principles for action in a sort of abstract world.
Right.
And so I think Hegel is arguing for principles of action for this world, the world of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think Kant's world would be one example of that, but you get, all kinds of those kinds of little abstract worlds in economic theories and political science and so forth.
So, I mean, Hegel is a kind of a ruthless realist. I posted that little Heine quote in the Discord several months ago. I just got to read it, right? So Heinrich Heine, the famous poet, German poet of the mid-19th century, he studied with Hegel. And so he went to Hegel's office hours occasionally to talk philosophy with him. And Heine relates this anecdote later when they're talking about, living virtuously and whether living virtuously will bring you rewards, and a lack of virtue will lead to punishment, right? Heine and Hegel basically says no, and then Heine protested. Is there no happy dwelling place above to reward virtue after death? Hegel fixed Heine with a wilting gaze. So you want a tip for having taken care of your sick mother and for not having poisoned your dear brother? Right. So I mean, there's the view from the absolute. The wilting gaze at pious hopes. I love that. I love it. You want a tip?
Also, morality is commerce. What's your morality worth?
Yeah, exactly.
American way.
I don't know.
Well, if Bo's showing himself, it means it's time to wrap this up.
When the bow comes out of its hibernation,
That's right.
the Hegelian owl must fly soon. And we whatever.
Awesome.
All right, guys. This was great today.
Yeah, I'm beginning to lose a bit of steam here anyway. So
Yeah, no, it's perfect timing. But we did make more. I feel like we made maybe a little bit more progress than usual. But I could be wrong about that. I don't know.
Well, we did 5 paragraphs last time. We read 5 paragraphs this time.